Back in the garage, back in the garage, back in the garage today, back in the garage today. What's up guys, back in the garage tonight, and I'm gonna be honest with you, it is not the most exciting video, but it is a video that could save you up to 50 bucks if you don't change your own tires, because most shops, at least in my area, will charge you $50 per wheel to mount and balance the tire if you take your bike in, but they'll only charge you $25 per wheel to mount and balance the tire if you take the wheels in off of the bike. So tonight I'm going to show you how to take the wheels off of a KTM 1290 Super Adventure. It's going to be very, very similar on the other KTM Super bikes, and to be honest, it's not a whole lot different on other motorcycles, so let's get to work. Alright, so we're going to start with the rear wheel. So step one is put the bike up on the center stand. If you don't know how to do that, then you're probably not going to be very good at the rest of this. Step two is to push in on the brake caliper. That just ensures that the pistons are pushed in, and it gives you a little bit more free play. The next step is removing the speed sensor. That is a 4mm Allen. We're just going to spin this bolt out, just like this. And then pop out the speed sensor and just kind of get it out of the way. Next up is removing the axle nut. You are going to need a 32mm socket in order to do that, and I'm going to be using a braking bar. You're also going to pop off the alignment spacer right like that. Now I only have one camera out here with me tonight, but basically all you're going to do is push the axle through, allowing the disc to fall out of the brake caliper. And it's going to come out this side, so as it does, obviously you want to remove the chain from the sprocket. I'm going to set the camera back away so you guys can get a good look at this. And that's pretty much it. That's how you take the rear wheel off of a 1290 Super Adventure. You can tell my sprocket's a little dirty. I'll get that cleaned up. One thing you didn't see, over on the right hand side there is a wheel spacer that's going to probably fall out. You just need to make sure you put that back in when we go to reassemble, which will be sometime tomorrow. Alright, to remove the front wheel, we're going to start out with the bike on the center stand. But we want to get the front wheel up off the ground. I have a skid plate, so I'm going to use a floor jack. There are a bunch of different ways. You could hoist it from the ceiling, you could use a front wheel stand, tons of different things you can do. I'm just going to use the jack because I think it works fine. Now you can see using the jack, I don't have it very high up in the air, just enough. Okay, so using a 45 Torx head bit, the first thing I'm going to do is take the two screws out that are holding on the brake caliper. I'm going to do it on the left side and then also turn around and do it on the right hand side. Okay, I've got the disc brakes removed off both sides. Also, despite what the book says, and I did show you that I had a little bit of air underneath the front tire, I actually have it down on the ground right now. It makes it a little bit easier to spin all these nuts and bolts loose. I've got the jack in place so then I can pop it back up when I'm ready to actually remove the front wheel, but for right now it is touching the ground. Next thing we're going to do is loosen this front axle bolt. Again, we're using a 32mm socket. Be very careful because there's not a large shoulder on there and you don't want to round anything off. But you want to go ahead, you don't want to take it all the way off, you just want to loosen it up a little bit, crack it loose, and then I'll show you what to do next. Next thing we want to do is loosen the pinch bolts on each side. You can see them right there. They are a Torx 40 head. We're not going to back them all the way off, we're just going to loosen them up a little. One other quick thing here on the front, make sure you remove the speed sensor. It's this nut right here and that pulls right out. And there's your speed sensor removed. With the pinch bolts loosened up on both sides, the next thing we're going to do is spin this off the rest of the way, pull the axle through, and remove the front wheel. Just make sure you keep your brake calipers clear because you don't want them bumping into your wheel and possibly scratching it. There's your front axle removed, and there's your front wheel removed. Putting fresh rubber on these wheels tomorrow. So they'll take me out to California and back. You have this spacer right here. Go ahead and pull it out. And I'll come back in here tomorrow and show you guys how to remount them. When you get done removing the front wheel, take one of the bolts and put it back in the brake caliper there. That way you're not putting any unnecessary tension on the brake line while you're waiting to get your tires changed. One more quick thing before I cut this off for the night. Never want to trust the jack won't lower a little bit, so what I've done is put the axle back in the front here and put a jack stand underneath of it. You can block this up all sorts of ways. This way works for me. It'll sit here overnight, and this time tomorrow we'll have new tires on the wheels. Alright, so we got the brand new Continental Trail Attack 2 tires mounted on the rims. You can see my old tires, they've only got around 3,000 miles on them. They'll go back on later, but these are the ones that take me out west. We're going to start with the front wheel first. Before we do that, two real quick things. Now is a perfect time to clean up your rims because they're off the bike and everything's easier to get to. So if you want clean rims, now's the time to clean them up. Also, if you're running a chain drive bike, now is a perfect time to clean up your chain. You can see mine's all cleaned up there. There's this greaser spray all over the place, but at least the chain is now clean. Get yourself a tub of grease because we have the axles and some spacers. We're going to be greasing up here in just a moment. So in the case of my bike, the two things I want to grease: one, I want to grease this area on this spacer, and two, I want to put a light coat of grease on the front axle. Once that's done, we'll go to putting the front wheel in. Next thing we're going to do is get the axle put in through the front wheel here. Make sure your wheel spacer is in. If you had put the bolts into the brake calipers to hold them temporarily, you need to pull those back out. I've just taken two big giant zip ties and zip tied them to the outside bracket here. That way they're out of my way while I'm getting this wheel lined. And just like that, the axle is through. We're going to go ahead and spin this on, but we're not going to tighten anything quite yet. Alright, next up I'm going to undo this zip tie here that I put on the brake caliper. These are reusable zip ties. And then we're going to slide it down on the rotor and get them hooked back up. Now one thing you might have to do to give yourself a little extra clearance is just take a screwdriver in here, push these pistons out just a little bit. That should give you more than enough gap to get them to slide back over top of the brake caliper. Then just line them back up. Get your first bolt in. And go up here and get your second bolt in. Once you've got them started by hand, you can put your ratchet or wrench on there. Tighten them down some, but you don't want to tighten them down all the way yet because we're going to check the torque spec and torque them for whatever the factory calls for. Now we move over to the other side of the bike. We're going to get this brake caliper reattached too. Again, just snug up the bolts. Don't torque them down too tight or anything because we'll get an exact torque spec. I've gone ahead and lowered this back down so it's touching the ground. Next thing I'm going to do is tighten up these pinch bolts. It calls for 11.1 foot-pounds or 15 newton meters. I'm just going to hand tighten them down. That'll hold the axle in place, and then we can get to locking this back down. Alright, so with your pinch bolts locked down, next thing you need is your torque wrench at either 45 newton meters or 33.2 foot-pounds of torque. We're going to lock this down next. That's it. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put the speed sensor back in right there. And again, you can just kind of hand tighten that back in. I mean, obviously use your ratchet, but I wouldn't bother with a torque wrench right there. Alright, hope you didn't go too far with your torque wrench because you're going to keep it the same setting, 45 newton meters or 33.2 foot-pounds of torque for the brake calipers, both of these on both sides. And that's it. You've got the front wheel mounted. Everything is good to go. Everything is torqued down. I'm going to take it down off the jack, and then we're going to get to work on the rear. Keep your tube of grease handy as we get started on the rear. We're going to put a little bit on this spacer right here, and we're also going to lightly grease the rear axle. Alright, so we got a few things we need to do here. One, we need to make sure the speed sensor stays out of the way. Two, we need to get this disc up inside of this of the brake pads here, and then eventually we need to get the chain over the sprocket, everything lined up, push the axle through, put the chain adjuster guide on, and then put the nut on. So same thing I'm going to do here with this brake caliper that I did on the front ones. I'm going to space it apart just a little bit to give me a little bit more room. Now, at least in the case of my bike, you kind of have to angle the rear wheel a little bit in order to get it to clear the brake caliper, and then once it's clear, it should go in pretty easily. Figures the battery died when my hands were full trying to get the axle through. You can see the axle's right there. I haven't put the chain on yet. Comes through the wheel, comes through the spacer, comes through the brake caliper holder, and comes over here through the swing arm. Now the next thing I need to do is get the chain on the sprocket and get it properly adjusted. I'm not going to show that right now because I just did a video on that recently that I'm going to link right up here in this corner, and then we'll come back and wrap this up. Next thing we want to do is put the speed sensor back in, so insert it and then just tighten up this screw right here. Last thing to do is lock down the axle nut, which is 90 newton meters or 66.4 foot-pounds of torque. Be sure to use your torque wrench. Now with the rear locked down, I'm going to recheck my chain tension. The other thing you want to do, make sure you go around, pump these brakes a little bit because you had everything backed off. Same thing with the front. Notice no pressure. Get them pumped back out. Last thing you want to do is get out on the road and find out you have no brakes. Alright guys, so that's pretty much it for today's video. That's how you take off the front and rear wheels of a KTM 1290 Super Adventure. It's basically the same thing for the other adventure bikes, and also how you reinstall them. And like I said, you can save yourself 50 bucks if you're going to get new tires put on, take them off yourself, throw them in your car or truck, take them up to the dealer, have them put some new rubber on, put them back on yourself, save some money, learn a little bit more about your bike, and you know, have an excuse to drink a beer. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, I look forward to you being one. If you have any questions, always let me know in the comment section below. And as always, I'll talk to you again soon.